welcome back to another Psych Reacts video. Today we are looking at the infamous Edmund Kemper. So let's jump into the background information of Edmund Kemper. He is known as an American serial killer, serial rapist, and necrophile who murdered 10 people, including his paternal grandparents and his mother. He is highly noted for his towering height of 6'9" and for his high intellect at an IQ of 145. He was nicknamed the co-ed killer because most of his victims were female college students. His parents divorced as a child and he moved to Montana with his abusive mother before returning to California. There is where he murdered his paternal grandparents when he was only 15, and he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic by court psychiatrists and sentenced to a hospital as a criminally insane juvenile. He was released at the age of 21, where he then targeted young female hitchhikers during his killing sprees, lured them into his vehicle, driving them to secluded areas where he would murder them, and then take their corpses home where he would decapitate, dismember, and violate the bodies. Kemper then murdered his mother and one of her friends before turning himself in to the authorities. So now that we have some background information on Ed Kemper, let's go ahead and jump into the video. Also, side note, this video does have some background static to it. It's just the way the video is recorded and there's nothing I can really do about that. So sorry, I apologize in advance.
Well, I'm not an expert. I'm not an authority. I'm someone who has been a murderer for almost 20 years.
Can you say how many people might be doing crimes like you were doing?
It would be a guess, but it's not. It's far more than 35. It isn't that impossible in this society. It happens.
Are there more people?
They didn't give up.
How many?
She didn't give up. I did. I came in out of the cold. And what I'm saying is there are some people who prefer it in the cold.
Good people see.
So right there he mentions he came out of the cold, but some people prefer to stay in the cold. What he's talking about is obviously staying in society versus turning themselves in and going to jail or prison. He also mentions that he gave up. He said, I gave up. He, she, they didn't give up. He's talking about himself as giving up on killing by turning himself in. He turned himself in because he was giving up, but he describes himself turning himself in as giving up rather than doing the right thing. So let's go ahead and continue watching.
A nice guy.
Did you like Kemper?
I like Kemper.
You were able to appear like an ordinary person, non-threatening to...
I lived as an ordinary person most of my life, even though I was living a parallel and increasingly sick life, other life. One victim let me back in the car. I locked myself out. She opened the door for me. My gun was under the seat. What in the hell am I doing telling you that? Am I a masochist? Am I looking to be tormented further? I'm trying to show you just how awful this got, how commanding these rages got.
Now, before we get into that, he mentions that he lived a double life. He was able to act and portray himself as normal. He was able to mingle in with society without raising anybody's alarms. But in the shadows, where nobody saw him, he was able to flip that switch and turn on this killer. The things he did to his victims were by far gruesome and disgusting, and it would give the normal person like the willies, right? So for him to be able to compartmentalize those different sides of himself, he was able to then portray a normal life. He was able to set that side of himself away when going into society and mingling with people. You'd be surprised how many psychopaths actually live within your world. A lot of them are very good at disguising and putting up a front. They're very good at copying. They're very good at being a chameleon, right? These are your top corporate bosses, politicians even. People who have those higher up jobs. Now, not all of them are psychopaths, obviously, but there are some that lie within our society. And it's possible that you know one, but you might never find out who it actually is. So it's interesting to see how many psychopaths actually intermingle within normal society. And some of them don't turn into killers, some of them just become really good businessmen, but they are able to live that life because they are good at using others to get themselves higher. They're able to use others to get what they want, and therefore they climb the ladders to get to the top part of said business or a different type of job.
This got, how commanding these rages got. I was raging inside. There was just incredible energies, positive and negative, depending on a mood. That would trigger one or the other. And outside, I looked troubled at times. Other times I looked moody. Other times perfectly serene. Not very sane. But again, people weren't even aware of what was happening.
So he mentions that he had this rage inside, and depending on his mood, it would be positive or negative. So if he was in a happy mood, it would be a positive rage. If it was a depressing mood, it would be a depressing rage. Now, some people might wonder why Ed Kemper decided to turn himself in, because a lot of people speculate that because he is so intelligent, he might have been able to get away with all of this and never get caught. So people were like, why would he turn himself in? Now, the answer is not because he was guilty. He wasn't guilty of his crimes. He wasn't guilty of what he did. Now, this is just my opinion, but I personally believe that the reason why he turned himself in was to escape the rage. So, like I mentioned before with Jeffrey Dahmer, these types of killers have this commanding urge to do what that urge is telling them to. It's very compelling, very drawing, very insistent that you fulfill that urge. And the urge would never be fulfilled, no matter how many times you committed a crime. They could never fill that urge. So I believe that Ed Kemper turned himself in so that he could escape the urge. Now, whether or not he did is a different question, because like Jeffrey Dahmer mentioned, that compelling urge was still there. It never went away. He said that he had those urges every now and then, but he couldn't act upon them. So turning yourself in with these types of urges could be a way to escape having to fulfill them. Not because you're guilty of what you're doing, not because you feel bad about what you're doing, but because you physically don't want to do it anymore. You don't have the physical strength, you don't have the willpower, you don't have the drive to keep fulfilling that urge. When he mentions turning himself in, he describes it as giving up. So it's possible that he did not want to keep filling those urges because they were too strong.
In 1972 and 1973, a series of murders shocked Northern California. College girls began to disappear while hitchhiking. 2 of the victims were picked up from the campus of the University of California at Santa Cruz. That's where Ed Kemper's mother was working as an administrative assistant.
You were involved in the campus because your mother worked there.
Yes. I was also involved in killing co-eds because my mother was associated with college work, college co-eds, women, and had a very strong and violently outspoken position on men for much of my upbringing. My mother was a sick, angry, hungry, and very sad woman. I hated her, but I wanted to love my mother. And I watched the alcohol increase. I watched her social life drop off. I watched her get bizarre. She had terrible pain from her life, earlier life, her upbringing, a failed marriage with my father. I'm a constant reminder of that failure. I hate to distill it down into such, into one-word realities like that. There's a lot that leads into that happening, but that is what happened. They represented not what my mother was, but what she liked, what she coveted, what was important to her, and I was destroying it.
Why did you actually?
So he chose to kill young female college students because his mother had a position of power at the college where he was hunting. Now, eventually he did kill his mother, but I feel like all of this was leading up to that. His mother and her friend were supposedly the last 2 kills he ever committed. So he could have been practicing, building up the confidence, learning how to inflict more pain and degradation, and learning and perfecting his style and his methods so that when he came to the person who meant the most in his killing career, he did it right and he did it well. And I'm assuming that's what the buildup was for. Now, it's possible when he was killing these young female students, he was trying to imagine it was his mother. The amount of hate that Ed Kemper had for his mother was very extreme. His mom was very abusive, and apparently, like he just said, he was the living remembrance of why his father and mother divorced. Now, again, this ties back into nature versus nurture. His mother was abusive. She probably constantly reminded him that he was the reason why her and her husband divorced, and probably called him a whole bunch of nasty names, treated him horribly and all of that, not condoning what he did. But this is what happens. You take a child and you teach them hate. This is what you get. It's the same thing with Richard Kuklinski, where you teach a child hate, that's what they learn, that's what they know, and that's all they know. So for Edmund Kemper, I feel like this was all sort of a retaliation towards his mother. These girls would go missing at her school, so I'm sure like the reputation of the school might have gotten affected, and since she was in a position of power, it's possible that that reputation fell onto her. So it's very well organized in causing extreme harm towards his mother.
Why did you actually kill the girls?
My frustration, my inability to communicate socially, sexually. I wasn't impotent, but emotionally I was impotent. I was scared to death of failing in male-female relationships. I knew absolutely nothing about that whole area. Even if just sitting down and talking with a young lady. I need to be able to really communicate, and ironically enough, that's why I began picking people up. And I'm picking up young women, and I'm going a little bit farther each time. It's a daring kind of a thing. At first, there wasn't a gun. I'm driving along. We go to a vulnerable place where there aren't people watching, where I could act out, and I say, no, I can't. And then a gun is in the car, hidden. And this craving, this awful, raging, eating feeling inside. I could feel it consuming my insides, this fantastic passion. It was overwhelming me. It was like drugs. It was like alcohol. A little isn't enough. At first it is. And as you adjust to that, psychologically and physically, you take more and more and more. It's the same process. So it finally came down to the thing of, do I dare bring this gun out? Already realizing if that gun comes out, something has to happen. It was going to happen. I didn't see it then, but it was going to happen. I was playing a dangerous game with a loaded gun. It got us all.
Remember when I told you that killing is like a drug to these people? Here it is, mentioned by one of the killers themselves, that it is exactly like a drug addiction. Instead of craving that high, they crave that violence. But every time they commit said act, they need more. So it escalates. Like you said, he started just picking up the girls, driving them to secluded areas, trying to practice engaging with the opposite sex. But when he felt confident in that, it needed to go further. So that's when he put the gun in the car. Then he had to build confidence with the gun in the car. Not bringing it out, but just build confidence talking to this girl while knowing a gun is in the car. And then once he got comfortable with that, that's when he escalated to actually taking out the gun. And he said, when the gun gets taken out, I have to do something. Because then she could run away, get a cop, get a description for him, and then the police would be looking for him. So he knew that as soon as the gun came out, he had to act. So it's interesting to see how that escalation actually comes into play. It's interesting to hear a killer talk about the escalation of how they started killing. Because it's very unlikely that someone just pulls up and just kills someone, right? Unless they're like an absolute psychopath. But with people like Ed Kemper, who had inept social skills, emotional skills, this is where these escalations come into play. So I thought that was really interesting. I'm sure that once he was able to build confidence in taking out the gun and being comfortable with what he does when he takes out the gun, I'm sure it escalated more into the necrophilia part, because he was trying to feed that hunger that he mentioned. He was trying to feed that hunger, fulfill that urge, because every time he committed an act, it got stronger. So I'm gonna wrap off this episode of Psych Reacts here. Although we are only 5 minutes into a 20-minute video, I feel like we've covered a lot, talked about a lot, and also if you want to see more of this video, be sure to drop a like down below. It truly does help me out, and I appreciate all of you for supporting me. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I truly enjoy reading what you guys have to say. So if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you know when I upload a brand new video. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I truly appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Peace!